The mansion at 1313 Mockingbird Lane loomed against the slate gray sky. Its weathered condition was just a shadow of its once great state. Totally overgrown, the plants creeped all over the building. As the Henderson family's rented moving truck crunched up the gravel driveway, 12-year-old Emily just couldn't shake the feeling that the house was, somehow, watching them. "Just look at those dormer windows," Sarah Henderson breathed, her face beaming with an almost feverish excitement. "Aren't they something? This house has such character." Jack Henderson nodded, a proud smile spreading across his face as he killed the engine. "And at half the market value. Sometimes, kids, you just get lucky. I put everything we have into this house, and I feel like we just hit the jackpot." 8-year-old Tommy pressed his face against the window, his breath fogging up the glass. "It looks scary." Emily squeezed her little brother's hand. "Don't be silly," even as a chill ran down her spine. "There's nothing to be afraid of." She said the words, but she only half believed them. As Jack threw open the truck's rear door, a gust of wind whipped through the overgrown yard, carrying with it the faintest whisper. Emily shook her head. It was just a breeze in the old oak trees. It had to be. The first few weeks in the Hendersons' new home passed in a whirlwind of unpacking, exploring, and settling in. But as October bled into November, Emily began to notice oddities. The way the shadows seemed to linger just a moment too long in the empty doorways. There was a persistent scratching in the walls that her father insisted was just mice. And sometimes, late at night, she could swear she heard whispers. Although just barely, speaking words she could almost, but couldn't quite, understand. It was a Tuesday evening in mid-November. Emily was helping her mother prepare dinner, chopping on the counter while Sarah stirred a pot of soup on the stove. "Mom, have you noticed anything strange about the house?" Sarah's hands faltered for just a moment, the wooden spoon clinking against the side of the pot. "Strange? Whatever do you mean, sweetie?" Before Emily could elaborate, a piercing scream split the air. Both of them whirled to see Tommy, standing in the doorway, his face pale as chalk. The mirror." He pointed towards the hallway as he backed away. I saw. Come on with it, Tommy. What was it?" They rushed to the little black mirror at the end of the upstairs hallway. Its dark black frame was perfectly, unnaturally still. Not a single reflection marred its obsidian surface. "Well, that's strange," Jack said, coming up behind them. "Must be a trick of the light. Or something, huh? I'll have to clean it properly this weekend." As soon as they turned away, though, Emily could have sworn she saw something move, deep in the depths of that impossible blackness. It was really hard to tell, though. It looked like, maybe, black fingers, and they were beckoning Emily. The weeks that followed brought a slow, insidious change to the Henderson household. Sarah spent hours obsessively cleaning. Jack worked later and later. His once cheerful demeanor gave way to a tense, distracted air. And Tommy started talking to people who weren't there. Emily tried to ignore it all, convincing herself that everything was fine. But then came the night she found her little brother standing at the foot of her bed, his eyes wide, unfocused in the dim glow of her nightlight. "Emmy, the house wants to talk to us." Heart pounding, Emily didn't say a word. She just followed Tommy. Then, as soon as they went through the doorway, the temperature dropped. Goosebumps prickled all along her arms. A voice, soft yet somehow grating, like fingernails dragging across velvet, seemed to emanate from the walls. Hello, hello, children? Emily clutched Tommy's hands, her nails digging into her palm. What was that? Before Tommy could respond, a crash echoed from downstairs. They raced to the landing to find their father, slumped at the kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of papers. Bills. Emily realized with a sinking feeling. Final notices and foreclosure warnings. I've lost my job, Jack choked out. Sarah tried to comfort him. The company's downsizing. I don't know how we're gonna make the mortgage payments. Over the next months, Emily watched hopelessly as her parents grew more and more haggard, more desperate. The house seemed to revel in their misery, though. The whispers growing louder and louder, more insistent. Emily would often catch her parents in hushed, urgent conversations. One evening, when Emily was supposed to be studying, she went downstairs for a glass of water. As she neared the kitchen, she overheard a fragment of conversation that made her blood run cold. Can't keep ignoring it, Sarah. It's offering us a way out. But at what cost, Jack? How could we even consider? What choice do we have? We're 3 months behind the mortgage, and the bank's threatening foreclosure if we don't do something drastic. The voice dropped too low for Emily to hear, but a seed of dread had already taken root in her heart. She retreated to her room immediately, mind racing. What had her parents meant? Who was offering them a way out? One stormy night, Emily jolted awake to find her parents standing in her doorway, their faces hollow, eyes brimming with tears. Lightning flashed, casting twisted shadows all across the room. Mom? Dad? What's wrong? She asked, her voice trembling. Sarah fell to her knees, pulling them both children close into a fierce hug. We don't know what else to do, We've tried everything. If we don't do something, well, we'll lose everything. Jack knelt beside them. The house. It's shown us a way out. A way to save our family. Emily felt a chill as she really realized what her parents were saying. What do you mean? The house, it's alive and, in a way, well, it feeds off the life force of children, and it's offered us a deal. If we give you and Tommy to the house, we'll wake up tomorrow morning on the day we moved in with all our financial troubles erased. A clean slate. But you and Tommy would stay here, frozen in time. And you in the house, you'd never age, you'd never suffer, never want for anything. Isn't that all anyone could ever ask for their children? Emily backed away, pulling Tommy with her. That's insane! You can't seriously be considering this. What choice do we have here? We're about to lose everything. At least this way we can start over, make things right, and you two will be safe, protected forever, here in this beautiful house. Protected? You mean trapped? How could you even think about doing this to us? But even as she said it, she saw the resolve harden in her parents' eyes. The choice that was tearing them apart had already been made. A ghostly knife materialized in Jack's trembling hand, its blade gleaming. I'm sorry, he whispered. The wallpaper peeled back, and then, with a hand shaking so badly he could barely control it, he began to carve into the wall. Emily and Thomas Henderson. As the final letter was etched, a wave of dark energy pulsed through the room as they were immortalized in the walls of the house forever. Emily felt something fundamental shift in the world, as if the rules for reality had been rewritten. The knife clattered to the floor, dissolving into wisps of shadow. It is done. The house gloated, no longer bothering to hide its glee. The children are mine. And you, Jack and Sarah Henderson, will awake and to your new beginning. A chance to rewrite your story. Well, minus 2 small details. Ha ha. Can we say goodbye? Sarah asked, her voice. There are no goodbyes in my realm, the house purred. Only eternity. The shadows in the room began to move, coalescing around Emily and Tommy. Emily felt a tugging sensation, as if hooks had lodged themselves in her very soul. No! Sarah screamed, trying to hold her into her children, but her arms passed through them, as if they were already ghosts. The last thing Emily saw as the darkness enveloped her was her parents' faces, etched with a sorrow so profound it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Lives that would now unfold without any memory of the children they had just sacrificed. Everything went black. The sun rose on a crisp autumn morning, casting golden light across a Victorian mansion at 1313 Mockingbird Lane. A for sale sign swayed gently in the front yard, the word sold plastered all across it in bright red letters. A U-Haul truck crunched up the gravel driveway. Jack Henderson killed the engine, a proud smile spreading across his face as he gazed up at their new home. Well, honey, sometimes you just get lucky. I put everything we have into this house, and I feel like we just hit the jackpot. The old house sighed as Emma stepped through the front door, her feet dragging along the warped wooden floor. The rooms were cavernous and quiet, swallowing the sound of her soft footsteps. Emma's hand brushed the wall, and she winced as her fingers grazed the peeling paint. Cold. Everything about the house just felt cold. She wandered aimlessly until she reached the attic stairs, the narrow steps almost hidden behind a door that groaned when she pushed it open. The attic air was thick with dust, each step sending up small puffs that sparkled the light slanting through the single window. In the corner, half buried under some old sheets and forgotten houses, something caught her eye. A dollhouse. It stood there like a memory, small and tattered, yet so detailed and elegant. Emma crouched beside it, her eyes widening as she took it in. The faded paint, the tiny windows, even the chipped paint on the front porch. She knew this house. It was exactly like the one she stood in. Her fingers hovered over the roof for a moment before she touched it. Warmth flooded her hand, soft and soothing. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first she had had in weeks. She leaned in, peering through the tiny windows, imagining the warmth inside. And how perfect it would feel to live there. For the first time in this house, Emma felt at ease. Mom? Come look at this. Later, Emma, I'm busy unpacking, came her mother's distant reply. Emma sighed and turned back to the dollhouse. She traced the tiny door frame, feeling the same warmth seeping into her fingers once more. The air around her thickened with dust, but in that little world, everything seemed perfect, just like things used to be. Days passed and Emma found herself drawn to the attic more and more. The dollhouse became her special place, where time seemed to slow down. The outside world faded until it was just her and the tiny rooms. She'd spend hours in silence adjusting the miniature furniture, making sure the tiny plates sat just perfectly on the dining room table, the beds made neatly, just like they were supposed to. The little house never felt overwhelming like the rest of the real house did downstairs. When the air felt different, almost heavy, suffocating her, the sound of her mother's voice grated on her nerves. Her mother, Melanie, tried to act like everything was just fine, but there was always an edge to her words, too bright, too cheerful, like she was trying to fill a space that just couldn't be filled. Emma could hear it in the way she said, "We're gonna be okay," with a smile that never really satisfied her. Her father moved through the house like a ghost, saying very little, his footsteps always soft, careful. The silence between them all, deafening, stretched across every room, pressing against Emma's chest until she couldn't breathe. She just couldn't stand it. She avoided them both. Instead, she slipped away to the attic, shutting out their strained conversations. The dollhouse is always waiting for her, perfectly. When she opened the little doors, it just felt like stepping into another world, one where everything was calm, nothing was broken. But the real house wasn't calm. The accident still lingered in every corner. Her brother's scream echoed in her head, the one he never finished. Her mother yelled. There was nothing she could do. It all happened so fast. Emma closed her eyes, her fingers tightening around the tiny wooden chair in the dollhouse. She couldn't think about it. No, not here. The dollhouse was quiet, peaceful, perfect. The attic became her escape. At school, she was quiet, avoiding the other kids' questions about the move. At home, she hardly spoke to her parents, slipping up the attic stairs as soon as she came through the front door. Melanie tried to coax her downstairs, inviting her to dinner, suggesting a movie night, but Emma barely looked up from the dollhouse when she asked. One evening, Melanie appeared in the doorway of the attic, her brow creased with concern. Emma, you've been up here all day. Don't you want to come down and eat with us? Emma didn't respond. Her hands moved carefully over the dollhouse furniture, rearranging it just so. The tiny house was in perfect order. She wasn't. Melanie stepped further into the attic, her voice growing softer. You can't stay up here forever. It's not good for you. Emma's fingers froze over the dollhouse table. She didn't lift her head, her voice barely a whisper. I don't want to come down. The words hung in the thick attic air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Melanie opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Her footsteps faded back down the stairs, leaving Emma alone. In the dollhouse, the little family sat at the dining table, their blank eyes staring out from behind the tiny windows. They didn't speak. They didn't fight. They just existed. The house felt warm and safe, not like the empty echoing rooms down below. Melanie sat at the kitchen table one night and discovered, with her cup of coffee in her hands, a stack of papers that had just been sitting on the kitchen counter since they had moved in. Something she had found which she was exploring the house when they first moved in. While they were yellowed with age, the old newspapers, when she flipped through them, caught her eye. A headline. Local girl disappears from Victorian home. Only doll remains. Her stomach dropped as she read it. The girl had lived in this house, spent her days playing with the dollhouse. Then one day, she simply vanished. No sign of struggle, no clue as to where she had gone. The only thing left behind was a small doll. A doll that looked exactly like her. Melanie's hands trembled as she set the paper down. She glanced up toward the ceiling, where the attic lay silent above her. Emma was up there again, right now, with that dollhouse. Whoa! The connection sent a shiver. Her fingers tightened around the creasing, the old newspaper, her mind racing. The girl who vanished was about Emma's age. She had become obsessed with the dollhouse just like Emma. Melanie pushed the chair back with a screech and hurried up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. The attic door flew open and Melanie stepped inside, her breath quick and shallow. Emma sat by the dollhouse, her back turned, her hands slowly adjusting the tiny little chairs in the living room. She didn't look up. Emma? We need to talk. Emma continued moving the furniture in slow, deliberate motions, her body rigid. I'm busy. Melanie took a step forward, her hands trembling. You can't keep doing this. You're shutting yourself away in there. I don't want to come downstairs, Emma said. You don't belong up here, Melanie's voice just... This isn't healthy. You need to talk to me about what happened. You need to let me help you. I'm your mother, and you're all I have left. I feel like you're slipping away. Emma's fingers tightened even more, her fingers turning white. You can't help me. You can't take back what happened. You can't take back what you did. Melanie, desperate, said, I know what you're going through. We need to move forward. It's what Peter would have wanted. Don't say his name. Emma spun around, her face twisted with rage, tears brimming in her eyes. You don't get to talk about him. You were the one driving. It's all your fault that he's gone. The accusation hit Melanie like a shot in the gut, winded, speechless. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Emma's voice shook, her tears falling freely now. You killed him. You didn't stop the car. You didn't save him. You didn't even make sure he was wearing his seatbelt. Melanie stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Emma, no. It wasn't an accident. I tried. No! Emma screamed, her whole body trembling. You didn't try hard enough. I'll never feel safe here. Not with you. Not after what you did. Never again. The air in the attic seemed to thicken just a bit. Emma's face flushed with anger, her breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. I want to stay here. I want to stay in the dollhouse. The lights flickered. It's the only place that's safe. The light bulb above them flickered violently, and then, with a blinding flashlight, the attic was plunged into sudden darkness. Melanie cried out. As the light flashed, she shielded her eyes. But when she regained her consciousness, Emma was gone. Melanie's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps as she staggered back to her feet. Her eyes darted around the attic, searching. Emma? Emma? She called, the silence deafening. The only answer was the soft tick, tick, tick of the old grandfather clock in the corner. Melanie's eyes fell on the dollhouse, the only thing in the room. Heart pounding, she knelt beside it, her fingers trembling as she peered inside. Her breath hitched in her throat. The tiny attic of the dollhouse. There was a new figure, a doll. She could barely fathom it, a doll that looked exactly like Emma. It all happened so fast. The doll stood perfectly still, eyes wide, lips curled into a small, serene smile, one tiny hand raised as if waving goodbye. Melanie's knees buckled, she fell to the floor. Her breath caught her in the throat. She couldn't fathom it as the room spun all around her. The air in the attic felt cold and stale, and a faint smell, sickly sweet almost, like gold rotting flowers, filled the space. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside the dollhouse, the tiny world stood still. Emma had found her new home. Come on, it'll be fun. Mike's eyes glinted, silhouetted against the setting sun. Unless you're all chicken. The dare hung in the air. The feeling was electric, filled with possibility. 4 teenagers stood at the foot of Morrow Hill, staring up at the old rundown mansion that stood against the darkening sky. Its windows cracked and shattered. It was dark and lifeless. Zach clenched his fists, fighting the urge to look away from the house. We don't need to prove anything, Mike. It's just a stupid old building anyway. Yeah? Then why are you all shaking? He looked at Emma as she hugged herself in her oversized hoodie, making her look a lot smaller than she really was. My dad says that place is dangerous. Like, actually dangerous. Not just ghost story stuff. Your dad thinks TikTok is a type of candy, Mike scoffed. Besides, think of the views your blog would get. He put his arm around her. Teens survive night in haunted mansion. You'd go viral. Jess, the newest addition to the group, spoke up softly. There's something off about it. Can't you feel it? I mean, it definitely looks creepy, but her dark eyes darted nervously between the house and back at her newfound friends. A cool breeze whispered through the overgrown lawn, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something older. The trees lining the property creaked and groaned in the wind, their branches reaching toward the house like gnarled fingers. Mike started up the weed choked path, his stride purposeful. Last one inside sleeps nearest the creepy basement door. Wait, Emma called, but Mike was already halfway to the porch. She looked at Zach pleadingly. Zach sighed, squared his shoulders. We go in, okay? We'll stay for an hour tops just to shut Mike up. Jess bit her lip and then nodded. Safety in numbers, right? They hurried after Mike, but none of them wanting to be left behind. As they climbed the sagging steps of the porch, wood groaning beneath their feet, the last light of day slipped below the horizon. Mike rattled the door handle, frowning when it didn't budge. Then his face lit up with a reckless grin. Guess we're doing this the fun way. He backed up and then charged forward, slamming his shoulder into the door. The old wood gave way with a splintering crack, and Mike stumbled into the darkness beyond. The others crowded in behind him. Flashlights beamed, cutting through the years of dust and cobwebs. We're in, Mike said, rubbing his shoulder. He smiled and said, No turning back now. As if in response, the door swung shut behind them. It was a decisive thud. They all jumped. Nervous laughter bubbled up as they tried to ease the tension. But as their eyes adjusted to the gloom, a sense of unease settled over them. The foyer stretched before them, grand even in decay, with stairs leading up into impenetrable darkness. Doorways yawned open on either side, promising secrets. And somewhere deep in the house came a long, low creak, like old boards settling, or footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. Did you guys hear that? Jess whispered in an alerted tone. Before anyone could answer, a door slammed upstairs. The sound reverberated throughout the house like a gunshot. They huddled closer, hearts pounding. Still think this is fun, Mike? Zach said. The night stretched before them, long and dark, full of terrors, and they couldn't yet quite imagine. And the house on Morrow Hill awakened from its long slumber. It began to stir. Hours crawled by, each minute stretching like taffy. The teens huddled in what was once might have been a great, grand living room, their flashlights creating a small island of light in the vast darkness. See? Nothing to worry about, Mike said, but his voice lacked its usual bravado. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be here, that some part of him had always known he'd end up in this house. It was like a half-remembered dream, a story he'd heard as a child, but couldn't quite recall. A sudden gust of wind howled through the house, making the windows rattle in their frames. A door slammed somewhere upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps, this time louder. Emma clutched her phone tighter, though it had long since died. Guys, I really think we should leave. Zach stood up, shining his flashlight towards the stairs. It's probably just the wind. This old place, it barely has any windows anyway. It creaks all over. Just remember when we came up the front steps? You know, it's bound to make noises. Even as he spoke, he felt a chill. The footsteps were getting closer, more deliberate, and now beneath them he could hear something else, a low, mournful moan that just seemed to come from the very walls. Jess whimpered, pressing closer to Emma. That's not the wind. The temperature in the room plummeted. Their breath clouded in front of them, and frost began to form on the windows. This is weird. The moaning grew louder, joined by whispers that seemed to come from every direction at once. We need to get out of here, Zach said. His earlier skepticism evaporated like mist. He grabbed the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. It's stuck! He shook and rattled the door harder, but it just didn't go. Mike threw his shoulder against the door, but it held fast, not quite as easy as the first time. This isn't funny, guys. Who locked the door? A ghostly figure appeared at the top of the stairs, translucent, glowing faintly in the darkness. It beckoned to them with a skeletal hand. Panic erupted. They scrambled to find another way out, but every exit was blocked. Windows that had been clear earlier were now bricked over. They were trapped. As they huddled together in terror, the ghostly figures multiplied. They drifted through the walls and rose up through the floor, surrounding the teens. Faces flickered in and out of focus, some young, some old, all bearing expressions of infinite sadness and hunger. And then, just suddenly as it began, it stopped. The ghost vanished, the temperature rose, and the house fell silent. What was that? What just happened? Emma whispered, her voice hoarse. Before anyone could answer, a slow, heavy footstep approached from the hallway. A figure appeared in the hallway, tall, imposing. It reached up and removed a mask, revealing a face Zach knew all too well. Dad? Zach couldn't believe it. The betrayal, the disbelief. Sheriff Thompson's eyes were filled with a mix of sadness and grim determination. I'm sorry, son, but this is how it has to be. More figures emerged from the shadows, all wearing masks. One by one, they revealed themselves. The mayor, the school principal, all pillars of the community. Mike's father was among them too, and suddenly, Mike understood his father's strange family tradition of spending a night in this house with all his friends. What's going on? Why are you doing this? Jess sobbed. The mayor stepped forward, his voice grave. Our town thrives on sacrifice. It's been this way for generations. The house, it must be fed. Fed? Emma's voice was barely there. What does that mean? Sheriff Thompson looked at his son, his eyes pleading for understanding. Every generation, the oldest children of the founding families are brought here. Some are chosen to join us, to continue the tradition. Others, they keep the house satisfied, and well, the town prospers. Zach felt sick, his mind reeling. Everything he thought he knew about his family, his town, was a lie. But as he looked at his father, he saw the weight of generations in his eyes, the burden of a terrible duty. You have a choice, Mike, Zach, his father said softly. Join us, or join them. The house only needs two, but it's never complained about getting seconds. The choice hung heavy in the air, the weight of history and the screams of countless victims. Zach looked at his friends, saw the terror in their eyes. Then he looked at his father and at the community leaders who had shaped him his entire life. And in that moment, standing in that house, Zach and Mike looked at another and made a choice. Years later, Sheriff Zach Thompson stood on the porch of Morrow Hills. Moonlight glinted off the badge on his chest. A group of teenagers approached, their faces alight with nerves and excitement. You sure it's okay for us to go in? One asked, eyeing the dilapidated structure warily. Zach smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Those eyes were haunted, filled with an internal struggle that had never ceased. Of course, he said, it's just an old house. Nothing to be afraid of. As the teens entered, the familiar whispers began anew. Zach turned away, a single tear rolling down his cheek. The whole house would be fed. The cycle would continue, and somewhere in the depths of his tortured soul, a small voice screamed endlessly into a void. But this was tradition. This was family. This was Morrow Hill.